Hey, before we get the show going today, I wanted to let you know that Low Profile and Three Magnets Brewing Company have collaborated and put out an album. We got an LP featuring live recordings from Scheler Sundays. That's my concert series that I do with Three Magnets. So these are a dozen songs recorded live at Scheler Sundays by people like, Kicking Giant, Doug Marsh, Elf Power, Lavender Country, the Mona Reels. A lot of people you have heard on this show before, and these are recordings. Michael Hurley, for example, has a song that is not available anywhere else, and you can get these right now at Scheler Sundays in downtown Olympia every Sunday through September 22nd. After that, we'll be putting them out online, so if you're listening to this later on, just check lowprofilepodcast.com. We will have the albums available there soon. Can't wait to share it with you. Low Profile receives in-kind support from Schwart'z Deli, San Francisco Street Bakery, Old School Pizzeria, Rainy Day Records, and Scheler Easy Premium Shitty American Lager from Three Magnets Brewing Company. This show is fueled by your donations. Please visit patreon.com/lowprofile and throw a few bucks this way if you like what you're hearing, because it is not free to make this show. That said, on with the show. From KAOS 89.3 Olympia and Ruinous Media, I'm Mark Lee Morrison, and this is the 85th episode of Low Profile. Right now, we're hearing the band Psychic Temple. It's the title track from their most recent album, Doggy Paddling Through the Cosmic Consciousness.
I couldn't hear a sound, and I almost drowned. Keeping my eyes on the waves. Dug my toes in the sand, and I heard my band. A song is the dream of our days. I'm just doggy paddling through the cosmic consciousness tune. You just believe in the wind getting blown off again, out of view.
Chris Schlarb started Psychic Temple back in 2010, and last summer I went to interview him where he works at Big Ego Studios in Long Beach, California. We talked about his work as an audio engineer and producer, folks he's collaborated with, the inner workings of Psychic Temple, and his musical background. Before I share our interview, though, I gotta do something, because since our get-together, Chris has been talking publicly about dissolving Psychic Temple. So I'm gonna try to give him a call and see if we can find out what that's all about. Oh, look, he's calling me. This is Mark Lee Morrison on a recorded line.
Well, me too.
Oh, nice.
How you doing?
I'm doing pretty well, man. Just editing some tape. You're working on an essay?
Oh yeah, I'd recorded the new Anna Butters album for International Anthem, and they'd asked if I would write some stuff about the session for that, and I'd been putting it off for like 3 months or something. I was just like, I love writing, but it's like they're just in the middle of like putting my record out and touring summer vacation and more touring. It's like, when am I going to force myself to sit down and do this?
Does that have anything to do with why you're closing up shop with Psychic Temple?
I think the main thing there is it's just, I kind of feel like I said everything I wanted to say it and more, And then I've got a new band called Black and White Pilot.
So the fan club need not worry that you're slowing down.
Yeah, probably not slowing down. I mean,
just a shift,
maybe
natural progression.
Yeah, totally.
Well, it's good to hear it. I played the listener in on the title track from Doggy Paddlin' through
Oh, yeah.
the Cosmic Consciousness, which is a fantastic album title, by the way.
When I first told people about that album title, I got a lot of eye rolls, like, what, you know? And I was like, I believe in this, you know, this means something to me. And I really felt like people have connected deeply with this record. So, seems like a great time to quit.
Like a bird in the breeze, or a dog in the trees, just a snail with no shell, or a god without hell. Like a smile with no teeth, or a moment's relief, just another mistake in the year of the snake. Like a book without words, the sublime and absurd, just a box full of dirt, or a lifetime of work. Like a scream in the night, is the baby alright? Like a thief in the sun, out for a walk, out on the run. When your heart's full of shit, but the song is a hit. Like a wish in the blue, or a coat or two, just a spot in the shade, or a song with no fade at the end.
A little bit of studio talk is what you're in for today. I am at Big Ego Studio with my old buddy from back in the day, Chris Schlarb, and we're in Long Beach, California.
Yep. Way back in the day.
Yeah, going back more than 2 decades.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Fisher J. Price and Hairspray or No and
Yeah, and you had
Create.
rockin',
Right.
Sounds Are Active Records.
Right.
A little context there, how we know each other. I moved here to Long Beach for just a little over a year, not very long. And I want to say it was 2001.
a lifetime ago.
Kind of in this neighborhood,
Yeah.
Compton, Long Beach border.
Yep.
And you were just down the street a piece. So for the listener, this is the only guy in my adult life who has gotten me to play an organized sport one time.
We played baseball.
Yeah, was it baseball or softball?
Oh, yeah, right. Well, softball. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I use those interchangeably.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, that I remember. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's funny.
It was a wild time. Are you still pretty athletic?
You know, I just had my hip replaced, and
Congratulations.
yeah, the new one's pretty good. But yeah, I played baseball like my entire adolescence, and I still love to play. I do mostly hiking now, 5 or 6 miles in a day, even on the new hip. Definitely a little bit less. For a little while, my friend Peter Chan got me involved in ultimate frisbee. It got a little bit more intense than I probably would have liked.
Sure.
I'm a competitive person, so yeah, things can go like it's like football for nerds or something.
Yeah.
Probably a bad combination.
Yeah. A little bit of, you could probably dress up however you want for that too.
Yeah, it's got a little bit of a Mad Max vibe,
Mm-hmm. Sounds dangerous.
Yeah, it was.
So back then you had a home studio,
Right.
and or was it you had like even a Studio A, Studio B in your house? Is that?
I guess maybe. I mean, for the time, for whatever I needed,
Yeah.
It's like move the crib into another room, and now here's a second studio room,
Yeah.
I guess thinking about some of that stuff is funny because I've been doing it, professionally now, but to think back to, 20 years ago, it was just, If you have some mics and like a 4-track, like your apartment is a studio, There really, for me, wasn't. I was at that time. I wasn't comparing it to something else. Like what I don't have. I was looking at it as what I do have or what I could do.
Right.
Which is a very different, I think, thought process.
Right. Just working with what you got.
Yeah. Which is kind of how I still think, I didn't want to buy a really expensive recording console when we opened Big Ego, in part because I just didn't want to have a bunch of debt from it. And I wound up buying an Audient console, which at the time nobody really knew anything about that company. But I was able to pay half down, and then I financed the other half, paid it off in a year. And now for 7 years, I have no payment for the recording console, which is sort of the centerpiece of the studio. But it also wasn't like a vintage console, so it has, quote unquote vibe, but it's breaking constantly with maintenance. I don't have that problem. I just have always taken a more pragmatic approach to that stuff,
Well, I mean, you made a lot of records even back then. You were just, before you were doing it professionally.
Yeah.
You were supporting yourself with countless side hustles.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I guess around 2001, I was probably either working as an investigator at a law office or as an insurance adjuster at the auto club at AAA. I think that was around that time. That sounds about right, which sounds like another lifetime ago. But yeah, basically every hour that I wasn't working for the day job, I was just trying to make a record or play a show or record something, all just to learn, for fun. It's like, I never looked at it as a hobby, and I still don't. There's nothing wrong with that word. It's just not how I approached it. I was like, it was a compulsion. It was an obsession.
It gives you meaning.
I watched a great video recently. It was a guy talking about photography, and he said, the camera gives you a reason to go to a place.
Yeah.
And I never articulated it that way, but that's exactly how recording or playing music felt. It's like you go on tour and all of a sudden you have like 30 places to go and all these people to meet that I would not normally meet, and places I probably wouldn't normally go to. It gives you a reason to go there. So every time you play a show, every time you make a record with people, it kind of gives you this, this impetus to do a thing or to be in the company of people that you might not have met otherwise. And those are good enough reasons for me. And then you get something out of it. You can like work with the audio, you can mix it, you can experiment with it, you can treat it, you can give it over to the person, you can never have to work on it again. It could just be a document. You know what I mean? It's like, it's so permeable. It's like, what are you where does it go? What does it do? It's like, well, I got to hang out with these people. We got to make this thing. And look, I have this like record of it happening, not even a physical vinyl record or something, but just a document,
Yeah.
And I always loved that kind of jazz or free jazz approach to improvisation. And it's just like, that's what happened, like we were there and that was what we did. And then over time, then I kind of started getting into the idea that you could have that layer and then put another layer on top of it of treating some of those things in post, through mixing, through, if you wanted to take like a dub reggae approach to it or a kind of like Eno, kind of like John Hassel treatment of like, live music approach. All of those things are like possibilities, Oh, you want to do an overdub? Well, maybe you could do that too. It's like the thing didn't like ever have to be over, if you didn't want it to.
Yeah.
Which could be a problem sometimes,
Sure. I feel like that was a welcome problem, but still a problem ushered in by the digital recording age when you just have unlimited tracks.
Yes.
It's like you can always keep going.
Yeah. I don't have that problem generally because I always have a limitation mindset, I know a lot of people who make a living doing music where they just maybe charge a flat rate for a production or a flat rate for mixing a record. I charge by the day because I think there's something good for both parties to say, okay, we have 4 days to work on this.
Yeah.
And this is my process, and you know my process ahead of time. And generally, my process is I'm taking audio and I'm running it out into the analog world, and I'm mixing everything down that way. So if in a week you want the snare brought up 1 dB, we're going to remix the whole thing, and you're going to have to pay for it.
Right.
Now, the problem for most people is that I'm totally inflexible with my process.
Right. Yeah.
So if they want that minuscule snare adjustment, there is the pain of having to pay for it to be redone. Most people are just mixing in the box, meaning mixing on their computer, and they're just literally, they have everything automated and they're just pressing like export. Now, if you are working that way, changing a 1 dB snare level is incredibly easy.
Yeah.
And that's the problem, is that it's so easy that nothing is ever finished. No mix is ever done. But the beauty and the madness of working in my method, which is totally self-imposed. I mean, nobody made me do this. It's what's fun, because it's also hard. Like when I'm charging people in the very beginning for a day rate of mixing and I don't give them good mixes, that makes me get better fast, because you either stop getting hired or you have to fix things on your own time. Meaning there were some early records that I did here where I was charging, a day rate to mix, and I would listen back a week later, a month later, and I say, God, this is not good.
Yeah, something went wrong.
I'm not happy with this. Maybe I know a way, I know how to fix it, or I know a way to solve this problem now that I have some perspective. I would go back and I would remix it analog on my own time and then give it back to the artist and say, you know what? You paid for this. I wasn't happy with it. What do you think of this? And almost 9 times out of 10, it's like, wow, this is great. To me, that's kind of, now maybe something that used to take me years to do, I can do in a day.
Yeah.
Because I put myself in this really uncomfortable position to have to get good at it, which is doubly, I think, tricky, because as I was just telling my wife yesterday, I just am always thinking I'm screwing things up constantly. I just am always thinking I messed something up. I messed this up. I did the wrong thing. And I think part of that is because I'm always trying to do something different. I am perpetually uncomfortable.
Right. You don't want to get stuck in a routine.
Right.
All the way.
Yes.
You got like your foundation that works. You build on that foundation.
Yep.
And then you throw a wrench in the gears to keep it fun.
Yeah. This is not what you're supposed to do in a capitalist-based society. You figure out what works, you automate it, and you just start collecting money. And then you check out. You hit print, and you do the easiest thing to make the most money. You eliminate the most friction, And that is my job as a producer. I think I eliminate friction on behalf of the artist and the musicians. But for me, I always want something there. Like I want something to sink my teeth into. Otherwise, after you make 100 records, which I have, like full-length records, not like a song or an EP, like 10 songs or a 40-minute album or whatever. You have to be looking for new things that are inspiring and interesting. And one way to do that, like a couple of weeks ago, I just recorded an entire record on the Tascam 246 on my cassette tape 4-track. Full band, drums, bass, piano, vocals, and trumpet. And I was in the room with everybody, and I'm basically doing a submix of the piano, bass, and drums onto 2 tracks, and then the trumpet and the vocal each on their own track. That's my mix. Now, I will mix the record down from those 4 tracks,
Yeah.
It was terrifying to do it, even having made so many records, because you don't have an individual control of those levels.
Right.
It's for an artist named Lafayette Ben Charlatan. We've made a couple of great records together, very much in this kind of it's a very cool, like vaudevillian kind of singer-songwriter, vein. All live, obviously. Great piano playing. maybe a little bit of like this kind of like 70s, like the jazz Tom Waits era, you know.
Like it or not, I've been smitten, bitten by the love bug when I saw you. Like it or not, I found what's hidden. You've ridden right into my heart's rescue. Like it or not, I see you in the morning, every evening, but all in my dreams. Like it or not, I can't rebut the way I hope to be part of your scheme. Like it or not, I'll be there waiting, whatever the cost, I'll spend every time. Like it or not, I'll sell every treasure to get even a minute of your time. Like it or not, I don't care about money, diamonds or power.
I made a couple records with Lafayette, and he's amazing, and I love that. I just basically a day or two before the session was like, I think I'm going to do this. And he's like, sounds good. Like 90% of artists would be like, actually, you know, please don't. Like, let's do the safe thing.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of fun for me. It's like I want to seek out artists who also want to do risky things, because sometimes the riskier, the more, I don't know, like the more compelling it is, the more people will actually want to listen to it, you know?
Sure.
I think the risk being eliminated in modern music is part of why it's so boring. You know, artists are constantly using technology to assuage the ego. Oh no, your voice sounds great. Look it on the screen. It's perfect.
Uh-huh.
Right?
Yeah, your ears don't matter as much.
Yeah, look at it. It's like, we're talking about music. They're like, look at the screen, you know? And, you know, there's this, it's an understandable thing. Like, as an artist, you're full of like anxiety and self-doubt. But the problem is that the answer to that is not technology patting you on the back, you know? The answer to that is like risk, hard work, you know, trying new things. So whenever I hear people say, you know, the sort of modern paean of like, nobody buys records anymore. Well, I make a lot of records and people buy them, you know, some more than others. But every record I'm making, I'm trying to make sure that there's a reason to buy the record. We're putting interesting groups of people together, interesting material. We've got these limitations in place. You know, we're just making a record in a day or two, or, you know, we're bringing in folks who've never played together before and they just learned the song. You know? All of those things are interesting to me, and I think they create something in the recording that is compelling. And hopefully that means that people will listen to it and say, like, what am I hearing? You know, like my friend John Beeler from Asthmatic Kitty heard a record that I made for Alicia Walter the other day. It's called Right Noise. And he just sent me a text. He's like, man, why don't records sound like this anymore? And I'm like, well, that's a good question, you know?
Yeah.
Mine do, or this one does, because it was supposed to sound like this. Maybe another record isn't.
This is Low Profile episode 85 featuring Chris Schlarb of the band Psychic Temple. We spoke in the summer of 2023 at Big Ego Studio in Long Beach, California.
We're not going for like a cookie cutter thing. You know, some people are like, I got to make records that sound like Sun records in the 50s or something. Like, I'm not crazy about that approach, you know, like a kind of cookie cutter. We have to have the equipment they use.
The same gear,
you know?
and same lighting. And
yes, I know. Like you can only play like pre-CBS Fender, you know, it's like, I can't. That's so much work. And it seems to take the place of like actual inspiration. you know?
Right. It's more like role play at that point. LARPing.
Yes. Yeah. Cosplay in the studio, you know?
Yeah.
So I don't want to participate in that. Like, I'm here to make new stuff, you know?
Hey, do you have any new things you tried and you only tried them once?
All the time. I was telling you about this great Junitime record, Remember the Magic, that I made with Heather Summerhauser a couple years ago. We worked on this album off and on throughout the pandemic. We started just ahead of it. And then Heather and I would get together once a week, you know, and just keep working on this record. I mean, we were listening to like So by Peter Gabriel and the first Madonna album, Control by Janet Jackson. Like, we were just like, what are they doing? You know, like, why does this sound so great? What's happening here? And so by the end, we got to mixing the record, and I had just gotten a Lexicon 224 XL reverb. And I'd already mixed the album. And I just had this idea. I was like, you know what? I need this on the record. But the record, I'd mixed it analog. It was very difficult to do. So I had this idea of just running her vocal or a snare drum out through the Lexicon so that all I'm then recording is just that reverb wet, no dry signal. And I thought, this is nuts. This is going to sound terrible. Or alternately, there's going to be like so much reverb on this record that it's going to be like unlistenable. You know, it's going to be a joke or whatever.
Right. The reverb is like a main character.
Exactly.
In the story.
Which is kind of what we wanted, but we didn't want it to overshadow everything. So I had never used that technique before. And it was this thing where I listened to the record the other day and I can't hear it. It's exactly the way that it should be. I tried not to be precious about it and say, no, the analog mix it's over, you know? And then to go back and use that process and still have it turn out and be as sort of transparent. You know, the way that sound works, it's almost like it's like making a sausage sometimes, right? You're like shoving all this stuff into the casing and it just takes on that shape, you know?
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it.
Right?
Music equals sausage.
It sometimes, yeah. For better or for worse. Yeah, or that other thing, you know, where I'm just recording everything to a 4-track tape machine with all these great musicians in a room, and if the recording doesn't turn out, everybody looks at me like, why did you do this? You know, like, you could have just done the safe thing and it would have been fine. Well, I just wanted to try this, you know, so we did.
Yeah. So you're primarily recording to reel, yeah? Or
it depends. I mean, I would say 80% of the projects I do are digitally, but we're recording on a 16-channel console. And then I have a lot of other projects where I'll use like the 4-track. And there's something about that process for certain records or certain projects that's just like, that's what I want. I want that sound. There's something weird that happens on tape where you just like snap your fingers and you have a certain character that would take you a long time to get digitally. You record drums onto tape and they're getting compressed just going onto tape, you know? So there's some things that happen there where it's just, I want that thing. There are other situations where, you know, an artist is paying $10,000 to come in and they want options.
Right.
Which is understandable. They want some flexibility.
Yeah.
You know? And so, you know, you don't want to be a maniac or a monster about it and say, no, you know, we must, you know, do this way. It's usually a conversation, you know? And for me, it's like my friend Kamal Humphreys, an incredible engineer and producer and artist in his own right. He used to perform under the rap name Radio and Active. He told me one time, you know, like, as producers, like we buy equipment because they're like spells, you know, like for wizards or something. Like, we always need a new spell. We need like some kind of new magic. And there is something to that. You know, you don't want to drown in the gear acquisition syndrome thing. You don't want it to be the thing that precludes you from actually doing work. But if you can get this thing that is inspiring to create the work or to accomplish the work, or it's the thing that the artist gets back in their headphones and they hear this reverb and they're like, wow, my voice, like, I always dreamed of hearing my voice like that. Well, those were spells worth investing in.
Definitely.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. pulls out a great performance and
which is
confidence.
Exactly. Which is what the whole thing is about.
So this place, I've never set foot in here before. I've seen some pictures, but it is just, it's gorgeous to be inside. Just like really thoughtful architecture, textures and shapes and colors that are just really welcoming. It's a destination. This is like, this is like a dream vacation for, some studio players who you might bring in to play with someone they've never heard of, or just someone who's been working on, rehearsing. And
my friend David Lord, we've made a lot of great records together. He has this series called Forest Standards. And after we made, I want to say it was maybe his first record here with Chad Taylor on drums and Devin Hoff on bass, he told me something afterwards. He goes, man, and this guy's, he owns a music school called Air House out in Kansas, in Wichita. And he's, obviously a brilliant musician. And he said, man, this was like going to school. It's like what I did here in like 3 days. Like I learned more in 3 days than I did in years of other experiences, of other musical endeavors. And I think part of that is just because, at its best, a recording studio is like a carpenter's workshop. My good friend Brian Moore, who was helping me build out the studio, he set up his saw out in front of the front door. And you can only do so much if you're having to kind of constantly set up and tear down your workshop every day. This workshop is always set up and ready to record. I'm ready. There's a stereo pair of mics on the piano right now.
Ready to go.
It's ready to go. I watched an interview recently with Daniel Lanois, and he was talking about this idea of house sound, which I really love. Like your stuff's like set up and ready to go. When somebody comes in, that's, what works because you're doing it all the time. Maybe you already have it mic'd up and the drums are ready to go and it's, in 10 minutes you're recording, because that's actually a lot. I hear and I feel so many artists and musicians being frustrated with all the technology involved with music. There's probably been so much music lost to just the frustration of not being able to capture it quickly, know? And I think what we do here at the studio is like kind of the opposite of that. Like I'm capturing, like as the band is like learning or running through the first tune, we're getting tones in the control room. And probably by the end of that first run through of the song that they've never played together, I'm ready to record.
Yeah.
And I've heard and I've witnessed stuff like this where you go to a studio and it's like 3 or 4 hours to get drum tones.
I've been there.
It's insane to me.
It is.
I can't even understand the reason for it. I mean, I guess the excuse is like, we want the drums to sound great or whatever. But it's like, who cares if the drums sound great if the performance isn't inspired? If it's the 15th time that people have run through, or, musicians are like, they're kind of like little like greyhounds or like racehorses or something. Like they just want to go. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
I got my stuff. Like let me go.
Right.
And then you're like, wait, just keep hitting that. Give me that kick drum. It's like just have them play the song. You'll know. You can get your levels in like 10 seconds. It's like, oh, it's clipping. Pull it back. It's like, oh, it doesn't sound good. Like let's move the mic. These things are so fast to do.
I mean, if you're making a record where like one of the tracks is just a snare drum, like with a lot of space in between, then by all means.
Right. Yeah. Take your time. Yeah. It's an interesting thing. I mean, of course, the caveat here is that, you have to like the way that the records that I've made sound. If you don't like them, then you probably don't want to come record with me or have me produce your record, or you don't even need to take the opinions that I'm espousing with any weight at all. You know what I mean? Like this is the thing that has always been fascinating to me. It's the way that I like to hear things. Other people don't like them.
Sure.
I did a record a few years ago, it was a very proud moment for me. It was an album for the Chicago Underground Quartet, which
I remember this. Yeah.
Yeah, it's an album called Good Days. So that's with Jeff Parker on guitar and Rob Mazurek on piccolo trumpet and Chad Taylor on drums and Josh Johnson on, I think he was really just playing piano and synth bass on that record. And we cut that record in a day. I mixed it in a day. And we were having this heat wave, and the landlord had like done some work on the roof, so they disconnected our air conditioning without telling us. It was like 100 degrees. And it was like this group that I'd been listening to for like, almost 20 years. It's like, I can't believe I'm like working with these guys and I'm helping them make this album, And my friend Nate Cross at the label Astral Spirits put that record out. And I remember at some point, like Nate told me like, oh yeah, like some people who bought the record complained that they didn't like how the record sounded. But he said, I said, well then send it back, I'll give you a refund or whatever. And to me, I thought that was kind of fascinating because I love how that record sounds. And I have of course, I have a particular way that I like to hear things. But one thing I really don't like is I don't like the modern jazz approach of like everybody's in a little cubicle or they're in a different room or space entirely. Like I was just
different space and time.
Yes,
perhaps?
Yeah, overdubbed by people who weren't there, I was looking at a William Claxton book of photography yesterday, and there's just a picture of Max Roach with a single RCA 44 ribbon mic for his overhead. That very well could have been the only mic on his kit, And there's this funny disconnect where people fetishize like old classic jazz recordings, but they want their modern stuff to be like scrubbed clean. Like nobody wants like a bleed on a microphone or something. It's like, like have you ever listened to like Sunday at the Village Vanguard or something like Bill Evans? Like, part of the great thing about it is like you can hear like the waitress like picking up plates like while they're playing,
Yeah. Somebody sneezes, no big deal. You keep rolling tape.
These things do not diminish the music,
So we haven't talked about it that much, but people have probably gathered that you predominantly record everybody live in the same room at the same time.
Radius.
You're capturing a thing that is happening in that moment that will never happen again.
Yeah, generally. That all the records that I love, they were made that way. And so, I mean, I'm talking from jazz to rock. I actually had the thrill of talking with Stuart Copeland last week from The Police for a little while. And I mean, I was just going back and listening to like Synchronicity, and man, there's something about a great trio, great rock band. Now, technically, they were all in slightly different rooms, but they were recording at the same time, And I mean, Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young, like, I love those records. There's this really great John Lee Hooker record that I love called Endless Boogie. And I remember listening to that record and just thinking like, God, like, how did they make this record sound so good? I think it was produced and maybe engineered by Bill Simzik, who ended up doing like all those huge Eagle records not too long after. But like the sound of that album, I just was like mesmerized by. And you can't get those sounds without a bunch of people playing in close proximity to one another, because you want to be close to the kick drum.
Yeah, you do.
That's where like the heartbeat of the whole thing is at, There's something about that closeness, that garagey kind of thing. Like a couple months ago, I was out in Joshua Tree starting to record the new Psychic Temple record, and there was something so great. We just did it all in this living room of a house that I rented. I'm sitting on this couch. My friend Chris Forsyth is playing guitar. He's like on my right side, 2 feet away from me. And then my friend Heather Summerhauser's playing keyboard 2 feet away from me on the left. Then Doug McCombs is playing bass 2 feet away from me. And then both drum kits, Ryan Jewell and Tabor Allen. And we're just in this like little circle, this little oval. It couldn't have been more than a, 10 or 15 foot, radius.
Mm-hmm.
Man, that stuff, you play it at a lower volume, you can hear everything. Nobody had headphones on. The drums can't play too loud because then they can't hear you. Some records are not meant to be that. That's okay. You can change your approach for each record. There's no rule. But if the whole point is like people playing music together, if this is a sort of the heartbeat of like your album, that's a good starting point.
So Psychic Temple you're talking about.
Yeah.
That's kind of the main Chris Schlarb outlet over the last decade or so. But you're a composer, songwriter, arranger, all this. You had solo records that came out on Asthmatic Kitty.
Right.
Back in the aughties.
Yep. Yeah, the Twilight and Ghost Stories record, and I did a solo guitar album called Making the Saint.
What's the connection with Asthmatic Kitty? How did that come about?
Oh, that actually came about through Soul Junk.
I was wondering if it was Soul Junk.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I was running, my label Sounds Are Active many moons ago. Mm-hmm. And like everyone who has an independent record label, I put out a Soul Junk record.
Yeah.
It happens to everybody.
Rite of passage.
Yeah. So I put out a couple Soul Junk records, became really good friends with Glenn and Michael Kaufman. And Kaufman, as the true sort of weirdo capitalist, artist, is beginning to help do A&R for his friend Sufjan, who nobody knows, at that point. Because really, I think maybe at that moment, maybe the biggest thing Sufjan had done was maybe playing on 1942 by Soul Junk, I think.
Right, yeah.
He played drums and like maybe some other instruments.
Yeah, it was a big deal. I remember that.
Yeah. So then that Michigan record comes out, and then Michael Kaufman all of a sudden goes, "Hey, I'm moving from San Diego. Liz and I are moving to Indianapolis, and I'm going to help run Asthmatic Kitty because this thing is kind of blowing up," which it did. And it's still a thing, like it's this perpetual motion machine,
Yeah.
So for a little while, we were doing actually like Asthmatic Kitty Sounds Are Active comps. We were doing co-releases.
Right.
And then, a lot of Sufjan stuff just kind of shot into the stratosphere. And it provided some interesting opportunities for me. So I think at some point I basically said, okay, like I can't run a record label. It's taking up all my time and all my energy. I'd like to just make some more music of my own, which is it is, speaking of things that are perpetually relevant. It's it's always this kind of interesting thing I'm dealing with. So I had a record called Twilight and Ghost Stories that Sufjan is on, Dave Longstreth from the Dirty Projectors is on, my friend Mick Rossi from the Philip Glass Ensemble. There's tons of interesting folks on that album.
Let's make love and thunder.
It's essentially a 40-minute music concrete, audio verite kind of experience. And they put that record out. It did surprisingly well for what it is, sold decently and got some good press and attention. And I was able to do some performances of it throughout the country. And I think it kind of did well enough that they were like, well, if you got some other stuff, like maybe we'll put that out too. And they even went so far as to create like a sub-label called Unusual Animals to put maybe some of my stuff out on, so that it didn't sully the Asthmatic Kitty brand. And then eventually I worked my way up from like the minor leagues, and they put out Making the Saint, which was like my solo guitar record. And then they put out Psyche Temple 2 and Psyche Temple 3. The first Psyche Temple record was a co-release between Sounds Are Active and Asthmatic Kitty, but they had almost nothing to do with it. I'd done a Kickstarter, one of the first Kickstarter projects for it. I paid for the whole thing out of my own pocket. And then once it was like a successful project, they were like, you know what? Yeah, we
put our logo on.
Put our logo on there. So, but then they did provide some really serious infrastructure and like just commiseration, to by the time I got to Psyche Temple 3, I was touring a bit. And while I was doing that, I was working on Psychic Temple 3. I wound up going down to Muscle Shoals, Alabama, recording at Fame with Spooner Oldham and David Hood. So
wow.
they played on that record was kind of this interesting turning point. Like when I walked through the doors at Fame, I was just like, I can't believe like I'm here. It was actually, it might have been one of my first times in a real recording studio. I'd done everything in houses and homes.
Right, yeah.
And it was one of those things where I was like, man, like I'm Your Puppet by James and Bobby Purify was cut here. Like Land of a Thousand Dances by Wilson Pickett was cut. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
All of these just mind-bogglingly great. Sweet Soul Music, I think, by Arthur Connolly was cut there. I mean, just...
I feel like you could probably smell the history in there.
Oh, man. It was incredible.
Yeah.
And there's this great sign, you walk through the threshold. It was like, through these doors have walked the greatest producers, musicians, and artists of our time, And I was like, dude, I just walked through those doors, It was a wild...
Looking for security.
Yeah, it was a heady moment, for
Yeah.
me. I'm singing these songs, and I'm like, I don't deserve to have these musicians backing me up, Like, I maybe we should just we should have somebody who could really sing on this stuff, And I forced myself to do it and took ownership of, that endeavor. And sometimes, it's one thing to be the producer of a project. It's another thing to be the artist of the project. There's nothing more revealing or intimate than like one's voice. It tells you so much about the person,
Yeah, there's a vulnerability there.
Yes. And also, I did not grow up as a vocalist. I wasn't like, I was groomed to do this. You know what I mean? It was something that I came to reluctantly because I just felt like I was writing too much stuff. And I was having to pay people or beg people to sing my songs, and it was like, okay, like if I'm going to keep writing, 20 songs, I can't, how am I going to put this together, So that was kind of a formative period of time. And then I made Psychic Temple 4, and I had the great Terry Reid singing with me and playing some guitar with me on that album. I just kept throwing myself into these moments where I was like, oh my God, like what did I get myself into, like how can I sing next to one of the great rock and soul vocalists ever?
Yeah.
How? I don't deserve to be standing shoulder to shoulder with him, and we cut our vocals that way. You'll go from a state of mind where you're like, I am a total amateur and I can't do this and I don't belong here, to, well, you better do it because Terry's standing right there and he sounds great.
Yep.
So there was a bunch of that on that record. I mean, I did a session with Max Bennett, who was, I think in his mid-80s at the time, who had played on all the classic Joni Mitchell stuff, had played bass on all that stuff in the 70s. He was on Hot Rats by Frank Zappa.
Wow.
I mean,
yeah.
To be able to have just played music together with him. There was a moment on one tune where Max played a lick that I recognized from a lick that he played in France, They Kiss on Main Street, which is on Hissing of Summer Lawns on the Joni Mitchell record. And he played, basically it was like a passing lick.
Oh, wow.
And I was so stunned by it that I just stopped playing. Cause musicians, my friend Stuart calls it sweet ears. You know, it's like you hear something, you're just like, oh, and you got sweet ears, you know. And I for sure had sweet ears because I was like, I listened to Hissing of Summer Lawns for 20 years. And now I'm sitting here and I wrote a song that was good enough for Max Bennett to play bass on, and he gave me the same thing he gave Joni. Dude, that is, I mean, that's humbling and, you know, bizarre and wild and rewarding, like all at the same time, you know.
That's so sweet.
Yeah, it was incredible. It's on a song called Paper Tiger.
All your endless wandering has left you in a state beyond repair. Your dreams are distant as the sea and crumble like the flowers in your hair. No, and join your sisters and march for something you're convinced is true. You're a paper tiger and the world will cut you down before it's through.
Some of my favorite work you've done is just the improv stuff. I get lost in it.
Well, there's a lot of it. I mean,
there's a lot of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, so which stuff in particular? Because, I mean, there's the music for airport stuff and, you know, some of the large ensemble stuff.
I love the new Black Sabbath piece.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Psychic Temple plays Planet Caravan.
My favorite song by them.
Totally. I know.
Vibe-wise, it's just like
I could
singular.
I listened. That was the impetus of that, was that I would just listen to the original on repeat for like an hour. Mm-hmm. And I was like, I want to live in this vibe, you know? And then you start to dig into it and you're like, it's 2 chords. That kind of started hipping me to this thing where I started thinking a lot about trance music. There's something about Planet Caravan that has that. It's like you're doing the bare minimum harmonically, and that allows for all of this other stuff to happen. And I've actually been making a series of records that I've just been calling trance records that nobody knows about. I haven't talked about them at all. I've done 5 or 6 sessions like this where I just get a bunch of musicians together and we just start playing. And there's something really gratifying about that because it sort of offsets all of the work that I have to do on all these other records I'm producing, where it's like highly regimented. That's my job, right?
Right.
And then to not forget that I am also like a insatiably creative being. I just want some things that kind of only exist to satisfy me in the moment. And then I just put them away. I put the recordings away and I'll come back to them later, a year from now, 10 years from now. I don't know. But they exist and they were important to do.
Yeah. You got a time capsule.
Right.
Yeah.
Every record you make is like a period of your life. I literally just think about my life around the records I made, you know? And I was like, oh, I was working on this record then, or I was working on that record. I was hanging out with these people. I was working with these musicians. Some things are not worth giving up. I mean, I think every record takes a bit of you. Mm-hmm. I definitely thought about when Mike Baguetta and Jim Keltner and Mike Watt and I made that first Wall of Flowers record together with all of them here in the room. I mean, just getting them all in the same place was insane. But that was one of those things where I remember thinking afterward, like, just these three people don't exist in any context without, like, it was my job to realize it. And that takes a lot of work. Each album is a commitment. And then you're kind of never, in some ways, you're never done with it, especially because we have a record label, with Big Ego Records. Like, we put that album out. And so then I'm hiring someone to write the liner notes for it and do the artwork for it. And then we're mailing out hundreds of copies to people in the mail, and we're trying to get press for it. And you're sort of like, you make a record with somebody and it's like a little marriage.
It's a commitment.
It's a commitment. Yeah, for the long haul, hopefully.
Man, the only thing we didn't really touch on that I wanted to thank you for, and I mean, I don't know, this was just a gig for you, but the whole Viva Durant thing.
Oh, yeah.
It was magical. You used the music for that?
With my friend Alex Sadnick.
You somehow made this room sound like New Orleans.
Yeah.
On the whole thing, from the storytelling. So it's an audio book for kids on Audible.
Yep. Yeah.
And
so I produced
2 of them, right?
Yes, there's 2 of them. We're actually working on the 3rd one right now. My friend Ashley St. Armand, she wrote them, and she's been a friend of mine for a long time. We made a bunch of music records together. She has a music project called Jazzy Ash, and we became friends. We have a lot of friends in common, musician friends. And the audiobook stuff came along. She wrote these great stories. And so Alex and I got together and we each wrote a couple of themes. We did a bunch of different variations on those themes. Again, everybody in a room together. And it's, it's as easy as saying, like, okay, we played it with the accent, here on the last take. Let's try a different variation. I won't play guitar. And then we put, we kind of move some of the rhythms around a little bit, or we make it a little bit more introspective. It's just so much communication in the room after you do the work of, like, writing a theme. You have a chart with the melody and the chords on it. Mm-hmm. And then you can have like 20 different versions of that piece of music if you have great musicians in a room and you just talk. It's like, I can't understand the thought process of doing all this stuff in a computer, That's not art, And I hear so much music that just sounds like it's just this flat under glass, like it's just the bare minimum. What do they call it in business? Minimum viable product,
Sure.
It's just like, here it is, like some temp music or library music, and it just, there's nothing there, I always use like Vince Guaraldi's music for Peanuts as a template,
Right.
And the beauty of what they did on all of that stuff was that they created that stuff independently. They animated it, did the script, all independently. They hired Vince Guaraldi to do the music, and then they licensed it. So the beauty of doing the Viva Durant projects was that we were taking that Vince Guaraldi kind of, Peanuts vibe, and we were saying, like, God, wouldn't it be great if work for children was created with this kind of soul and spirit, because they deserve it. I put a tremendous amount of love and work into it, but what happens after that, is anybody's guess.
Yeah. Well, do you want to point the listener to where they can find more of your work and what you're up to?
Yeah, sure. So the studio website is Music from Big Ego, BIGEGO.com. That's a play on, music from Big Pink, which is what the people at Atlantic thought about the first Crosby, Stills, and Nash record. They said, they should call this record Music from Big Ego.
Oh, thanks for getting that in there. Yeah.
Yeah, I always thought that was a hilarious story. And then the record label's just Big Ego Records.
Well, thanks for having me in and
pleasure.
being the second guest to engineer their own episode after Glenn Galloway.
That's funny.
Yeah.
That's great. I'm in good company.
Bless up.
Thanks.
This has been Low Profile, episode 85, featuring Chris Schlarb of the band Psychic Temple, recorded in 2023 at Big Ego Studios in Long Beach, California. This episode's website, lowprofilepodcast.com.